Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we'll be talking about using the power of nature to unlock your very best business ideas. Our guest is Jessica DeAngelo, Chief Hiking Officer and founder of Hike to Become. With a background in global sales and strategy, Jessica worked with Fortune 500 companies like Amazon, Nike, and Uber before turning her focus to the trail, where she now helps business leaders harness the power of nature to unlock their greatest potential. Through her signature methodology, she guides impact-driven professionals to become more present in their life and their work, and to tap into their boldest, most innovative business ideas. Jessica has taken stage at TEDx and Disrupt HR, challenging traditional workplace thinking with a fresh perspective from the trail. She's also creator of the Hike 31 Challenge, which we're going to talk about, and it inspires people to get out of the office and into the woods to fuel insight and inspiration. I am so excited to share her energy and her amazing methodology with you all today. Jessica, welcome to the campfire.
Thank you, Scott. I am honored to be here. So excited to hang out with you and your listeners today.
Oh my gosh. I've had so much fun just watching both of your talks, your TED talk, your Disrupt HR talk. I love the energy and I love what you're doing. It's so aligned with what we're trying to do here in Inspire Campfire, basically get people outside.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. We were introduced by a mutual friend, which I think is amazing. And you have been on your own incredible journey. I just wrapped up reading your book a few weeks ago, which I loved. And what I would say is that I feel like our meeting is a bit of trail magic. I keep finding people that also have this passion for, I would say, inspiring more people to get outside. Yeah. And so I'm just so excited to meet you and chat about all things.
I'm so excited. It is amazing when you step across the threshold, how people just kind of show up. It's like, it's amazing. I'm so pumped to have been introduced. So let's start right off the bat with Hike to Become. What is it?
So Hike to Become is actually my company name. But in order to really explain to you what it is, I'm going to kind of go back a little ways, maybe share a story for your listeners so that they can understand where that name came from. So I would say back in 2022, I resigned from a corporate role that I had spent decades building towards. I was a global account director, traveling around the world with a lot of these Fortune 500 companies and creating business strategies and then managing global teams to execute those business strategies and grow our business with those companies. And then in early 22, I honestly just reached this sort of point of a lot of people call it burnout. I often talk about how I think burnout is an excuse, but I reached, this point of feeling ultimately really disconnected from myself. And I found myself on a hiking trail, gained some clarity by just hiking regularly. And I resigned from that company and kind of walked away from this career I spent decades building, only to find myself, I would say, a few short 18 months later, building my own consulting practice and also feeling totally burnout doing that too. So here, I would say the irony is I felt like maybe corporate America was the problem, or like the pressures of the role was the problem, when in reality, I found in even consulting or owning my own business, I was the problem. And that led me to a mountaintop where I kind of had this big epiphany about myself. And that kind of led me into this Hike to Become experience. And so, every time I've reached this sort of point of ultimately feeling disconnected in my life, disconnected from myself, or this point of burnout, without even thinking too much about it, Scott, I keep wandering into the wilderness without my cell phone. And I've reached these moments of clarity. And that's really what happened for me. And the moment of clarity I had on the mountain that morning was what if we didn't have to wait to be the people we ultimately want to be, to do the things we want to do in life? What if we could just show up as if we already are those people? And my big epiphany was, what if I could hike to become who I wanted to be? And that was sort of the genesis of the name of the company.
I love this. Okay, I've got a few follow-ups right off the bat here. So I heard this story that, quote, led to a mountaintop and an epiphany. Can you tell me more?
Sure. So Saturday morning, this was in December of, I think, like 2023.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be playing with my kids in our lofts. We were playing restaurant where my daughter was the waitress and my son was the chef. And I was supposed to be the customer and actually be really present with my kids. Saturday morning, shouldn't have had my cell phone on me or working, but my phone dinged, Scott. And instead of staying in the moment with my kids, I answered that notification, and it was a client. And I was sort of busy typing up a response when the room got like really quiet. And at the time, my son was like 1, my daughter was 3.5. And I was like, oh God, like, I'm like looking at my phone. I'm like, oh no, it's too quiet for 2 toddlers. Like, I'm either about to save a life or get like an unexpected home improvement to your dad. Like, you know what I'm talking about. But I looked up and my daughter just sort of staring at me. And she's standing right there. And she just looked at me and she said, Mom, get off your phone. And it wasn't mean. It was just like this moment where I realized I left my corporate career behind. I made a lot of sacrifices, and the impetus for a lot of that is I wanted to be much more present in my life for these children, amazing tiny humans that I created. And here I was not doing that. And I sat with that for a few days, and I just felt like, whoa, I'm not being present with my kids. I'm feeling kind of totally crushed by this consulting role. I feel like I'm failing as a business owner. I feel like I'm failing as a wife and a mother. And so I did what I normally do. I just drove to the trailhead a few days later, right before Christmas. It was like 19 degrees out, 6 o'clock in the morning. I was the only car in the parking lot. Hiked up to the top of the mountain, and I started just asking myself all these questions like, how did I get here? What's wrong? How do I fix it? And that's when I realized, like, maybe I'm asking the wrong questions. Maybe what I should be asking is, when was I the happiest and the healthiest in my life? And like, that's when like the universal irony was, oh, it's always been when I was hiking regularly. And so I decided, Scott, in that moment, that if hiking was the answer, or at least how I could find the answers, I challenged myself to hike for 31 days straight in the month of January. Nice.
So that begs the question about hike 31. Am I jumping the gun here? 31 days?
Not at all. Not at all. So I'm sitting on top of this mountaintop. And by the way, my butt is getting wet in the snow because I'm not even wearing like waterproof pants. And I was like tired. So I sat down and I'm like, well, okay, so January has 31 days. I'll hike for 31 days straight in the month of January. And the impetus for that, Scott, is that at the time, my son was 1, my daughter is 3.5. I'm building a business. I cannot run off into the middle of the wilderness and backpack the Pacific Crest Trail for 3 months. That's not part of my life right now.
Right. Understood.
And I just, at first I felt like sad about that. But then I realized, well, okay, so if that's not in my journey, how can I recreate something similar that I can fit in my everyday life as a busy working mom, as a business owner? And this idea came to me, well, January has 31 days. What if I just challenge myself to show up on the trail every day without my cell phone, be in movement, be in nature? It's worked for me before. It could work now.
I love this. So the mountaintop, this is not only a metaphorical mountaintop, but it's also a literal mountaintop, because you got on the trail and headed up the trail.
Yes. Yeah. And to be clear, like, it wasn't really a mountaintop. It was more like a foothill in Boise. Like, I wouldn't call it any crazy elevation climb, but yeah. And I was so excited about this idea, Scott, when I was on top of the mountain. I was like, oh, this is perfect. I can't get back home. I can't wait to get back home and tell my husband. His name is Steve, and he's like, my partner in all things. And so I was like hurrying down the mountaintop to get back to tell him, like, I found some clarity and I think I just need to hike for 31 days. And that's when I slipped in the snow and the mud, and it basically bit it, like coming back down this frozen trail. And that's when the self-doubt and the limiting beliefs crept in of like, wait a minute, like I'm out of shape. I just, had 2 kids in the past 5 years. I can't remember the last time I've been on a long hike. Like, who the hell am I to be hiking for 31 days? I'm no one. And I had all these thoughts, Scott, and that's when the Hike to Become story comes to play. And I believe to this day, because I was practicing accidentally the methodology I now teach people, I was in movement, I was in nature, I was unplugged. I was able to come to my own rescue. And so the idea didn't die there on the mountaintop or foothill, which I think it normally would have done had I had my cell phone or been distracted. Instead, I came to my own rescue and I said, wait a minute. All the reasons I just listed that I shouldn't do this are all the reasons I should, because most people are just like me. Most people can't run off to Patagonia for a month and backpack to find themselves again. Most people need something that they can fit into their daily lifestyle and just find that clarity again. And so I sort of came to my own rescue and I was like, what if I could just hike to become who I ultimately want to be? And so, that was almost 18 months ago now.
I love this. Okay. Hike 31 is a challenge that you've created, but it manifests from this 31 days of hiking that you did yourself. And you said that you learned these lessons that you were accidentally teaching yourself.
Yes.
So can we talk about that month of January and what happened to you in the 31 days and these teachings that you accidentally taught yourself?
Of course. Warning to your listeners or anyone else out there that has a brilliant idea on top of a mountaintop / foothill and the sun's coming up and it's epic. You make some silly decisions like, hey, I should hike for 31 days straight in the month of Idaho or in the month of January in Idaho. Well, Idaho's temps soar to single digits. The trails are covered. And I didn't think that through, Scott. And so when I got back home and I did eventually tell my husband, this is what I want to do, he was fully supportive. Well, what I found is that there were lots of days where I would have to get out and hike at 5 o'clock in the morning before my family woke up because my schedule was so busy. Or sometimes there were days where I not forgot, but didn't prioritize it. And then I would be taking a hike at 7 p.m. at night, sometimes strapping Tristan, my little guide, to my back. And so it was this, I would say, exercise in commitment to myself to really create this sacred space container to have this relationship with myself. And to start, the weather was just this perfect analogy of it doesn't matter if it's raining or snowing or icy or muddy, you made this commitment, you have to get out. And I wrestled with a lot of uncomfortable thoughts in the beginning. That is one of the top things I had to keep showing up and dealing with these uncomfortable thoughts in the beginning. And a lot of people who have practiced since have admitted the similar journey. Yeah.
So walk me through that process and sort of what happened over the 31 days. What happened to that specifically, the uncomfortable thoughts?
So I'm speaking now just from my experience, but also that I've inspired countless people the past 18 months to practice this and interviewed a lot of them in their journey. And it's a similar common theme. I talk about it in my TEDx. So that I would say the first couple of days, you have this adrenaline rush, you're excited for this new commitment, you're ready to get out the door. But as you start hiking, the way I teach this methodology is that you have to be, and remember the acronym for hike, and I just sort of reframe that. So H stands for hike or walk. That creates movement. And that is really critical to create bilateral stimulation in your brain. And then I stands for be in nature. A lot of people live in cities who might be listening to this. In nature does not mean you have to find a mountaintop. Just find a place where you see more natural elements than potentially man-made structures, a blue sky, tree-lined street, something like that. K stands for keep tech off. And this is where most people, I think, fall down on the practice or don't understand the importance of that. But it's been studied and the science shows that the results of people's brainwave activity is wildly different if they're in nature and movement and on their cell phone versus not. And then finally, E stands for every day. You're going to practice every day for at least 30 minutes. And that's backed by science to be kind of that minimum threshold to change your cognitive function. And you're going to do it for about 31 days. The first week, you're kind of excited. You have all this adrenaline. You're excited to get out there. And I'd say a couple days in, you start having thoughts on the trail and moments of clarity around areas in your life that you might not be happy with. And because you are unplugged and away from distractions, I also encourage people to practice this alone, not with anyone else. And you start kind of having a reality check with yourself about areas of your life that you're unhappy or things aren't working out. And this is the uncomfortable thought piece that a lot of people actually really struggle to get through. It was uncomfortable for me. And that's why I would say like weeks 1 to 2, you wrestle with those uncomfortable thoughts and realizations of like, wow, I'm really unhappy, or this is causing this. And I believe, Scott, that the reason this happens is because we live in this ultra connected society where we are constantly connected to screens and cell phones and other people. We never spend time alone with our thoughts. And so when you do this practice, you are forced to spend time alone with your thoughts. And so stuff starts coming up and you have to deal with it. And that's the tough one for a lot of people, myself included.
This is awesome. I love the acronym.
Oh, thanks.
That is so
Keep
cool.
it easy, right? Yeah.
We're going to hardcore walk in nature with our tech off every day.
Correct. And it sounds silly and hokey. It's like, obviously, like literally Jess is just telling us to go for a walk outside without our cell phone. Yes, I am. However, there's been 3 distinct times in my life where I've practiced this. The first 2 accidentally. The last one was more intentional. It's always led me to the most transformative periods in my life where I've either left relationships that no longer served me, had massive career pivots, or even, changed the way I was showing up in my life and my work. So this past 18 months, I've been going back and sort of researching all the science behind why this method works. And that's a lot of what my book is about, is the science behind why combining all 4 of those elements works so well to turn your brain on.
Yeah. There's nuance there though, big time. Cause like, it's not just going for a walk. I mean, a hardcore walk in nature with your tech off. And most people
alone.
And by yourself. And most people don't do that. I mean, going for a walk is different than that.
For sure. Yes. So it's been fun. It's been interesting. And, I'm still on my journey, by the way. I went for a morning walk this morning. I am still sometimes wrestling with uncomfortable thoughts and having transformative moments myself on the trail. For me, it's become a staple in my life.
It's something you talked about in your, I can't remember whether it was your TED talk or the Disrupt HR talk, but you talked about how your experience has been that people are very uncomfortable being with their own thoughts. And I'm just curious, like in your 31 days of hiking, or maybe the people that you've worked with since, like, what are some of these thought patterns that people are afraid of? What comes up for people that they're afraid of?
So we're getting deep now. I love it. So I'll start with myself, Scott. Yeah. That feels only appropriate. So as I did my own Hike 31 challenge, if you remember back, the feelings I was wrestling with is, why was I not being present with my little kids? And why was I feeling so uninspired in my consulting career? Why was I getting burnout and overworked in that? What I found on the trail, a couple of things. First, and I mean, this is like some therapy stuff, some self-guided therapy, but I realized that for decades, I really tied up my self-worth in the amount of work and success that is a result of my hard work. And the reason for that is I grew up in a little bit of a tough childhood, and I always realized that work was always this positive outlet, that there would be, at the end of me throwing everything I had at work, kind of like more money, success, climbing a corporate ladder. So it seemed like a healthy avenue. And so my default, I discovered this on the trail during my 31-day hike, is that my default is to work really hard and put my personal life on autopilot. And I'm ashamed to admit that, but also grateful that I've had the time to unpack it on the trail, because it's taught me some radical self-awareness, which is a pillar I teach my clients, in that once you recognize there's a problem, you can become more aware of it in your daily life. So that's like one big epiphany I had. And I realized, like, wow, I'm throwing everything I have into this sort of consulting role when I have these tiny, beautiful humans at home who really need me to be more present, more powerfully present with them. And I need to recalibrate that so that I can show up and be the mom that I want to be.
Yeah. So I love this. And I want to ask you, like, the question about nature is coming into mind. And I think it's, what I'm hearing you say is, like, you're giving yourself this space for self-reflection, right? And these thoughts just when you give yourself space, like these thoughts naturally come, right? And I think maybe it's because we're not used to these thoughts because we're so busy all the time, right? We're not in that slow pace where you have that space and that time. And so I guess I'm just curious, like for you, like what is it about nature that draws that out?
So, I get this question a lot. A lot of people will ask me like, well, Jess, wouldn't I get the same thoughts if I was exercising in a gym or perhaps meditating? Well, I can't specifically answer that, Scott. Digging into the science is, I actually think that the way I describe it is if we're going to sit alone with our uncomfortable thoughts and what that may reveal to us, why not do it in a place that is scientifically proven to reduce stress and anxiety, enhance emotional well-being, and turn your brain on at a different level? If we're going to wrestle with all of that, I would say sort of big stuff, nature is the perfect environment to do it in because it is naturally kind of like not intended, really helping us reach this sort of equilibrium space where we can process it. And the movement helps. It's creating that bilateral stimulation in the brain, which is the basis of EMDR therapy. So I can't say for certain that nature is the catalyst for allowing this to happen. What I do believe is that by being in nature and movement, it is sort of conditioning us to be in a safe and comfortable space, have these thoughts, and then deal with them, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I mean, it completely resonates for me because, I love being in nature just alone. And, I don't know. I honestly, I'm not sure I'm sure there was a time in nature where like I felt those uncomfortable feelings, but I also feel like you kind of get to a place, and maybe you can talk about this, but like you get to a place where you enjoy, like you're not uncomfortable with those thoughts anymore because it's like practiced. And yeah, I guess I'm curious.
So yeah, the uncomfortable thoughts. And so for myself and most people that have done the full challenge or a majority of it, typically that you get more comfortable with what's going to come up in the first, I'd say, week or two. And where I really see the most transformation in people, and myself included, is around, I'd say, like the midway point to the 3-week point. You've now recognized sort of some uncomfortable truths, maybe about yourself, how you behave, your life, whatever, why you might not feel inspired in your work. But then you move into this different, amazing place. And I sort of walk my clients through these pillars. But the first one is becoming fearless. When you're in nature and you're unplugged and you're in movement, you have some really great ideas that I feel like in a traditional office setting would probably just die or peter out. Where when you're in nature, something else happens where you're an avid, I would say, outdoors person yourself. Nature challenges us to show up in this way that we understand what fear really is. And fear is like, are you going to die? No. Okay. Like a lot of us, I think, equate fear with anxiety in modern day life. Yeah. And nature forces us to sort of come to terms with our own humanity, if you will. Yeah. And so so this fearless component starts entering in, and this is where things get really exciting, where these wild ideas start happening. And instead of saying, no, that's stupid, or I'm not going to do it, you're like, well, what if I did? You start challenging yourself in really brave ways. So that's sort of the first pillar that happens after kind of coming over the uncomfortable thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, so cool. Okay. So I think we've kind of covered like how Hike 31 sort of came to be, but like practically speaking, so for people listening, like what is Hike 31? How do I do the challenge? How do I get involved and engage with it?
Oh, yeah. Great question. So I've made recently the Hike 31 challenge sort of public to anyone who wants to practice on their own.
Cool.
So any of your listeners that want to join the Hike 31 challenge on their own time, they can start any day. They just have to text the word hike, HIKE, to number 33777. And that'll give them specific prompts to just put in their email address and sign up for the challenge. And then they will get some information from me as the science behind the 4 pillars, why it works. And they are able to start practicing with some casual prompts, reminding them why each pillar is important and the science behind it.
Love it. So text hike to 33777.
Yes.
Couldn't be easier. I love this.
It's super easy. Yeah. for sure.
All right. So so you've asked a question several times, and that question is what if? And you framed it a few different ways, but like the one that I first heard was hike to become, it begs this question, what if I can be the person that I want to be now? Am I interpreting that right? I love that you asked this what if question.
So yeah, I think so. In my moments of self-doubt, after I came up with this cool Hike 31 challenge for myself, I didn't think about it at the time for anyone else. I really started doubting my physical capabilities, my busy schedule, and how I could pull this off. And I started to ask myself, well, like, again, let's reframe this. What if, in my mind, Scott, I thought, well, in order to do this, I would have to be A, super fit, and B, have a lot more time in my schedule and all of that. And I thought, well, wait a minute, what if that's all nonsense? And what if I could just worry about showing up on day one and essentially just keep showing up like I already was super fit, had the time in my schedule, had this thriving business? What if I just showed up with that intention on the hiking trail every day? Maybe I could eventually become that person. I don't know if that makes sense, but like instead of, we're all so worried about, well, I'm not the person that could do X, Y, and Z. Who cares? What if you just showed up like you already were?
Yeah. I love this. Okay. This is really cool. So the question is like, it's almost like a statement to yourself. I'm not fit enough. I can't do this. I don't have the time. I can't do this. Mm-hmm. But when we frame it in a what if, you basically give yourself an out. It's like, I'm going to go try. And if it doesn't happen, then fine. Like, but do I really know if I'm fit enough unless I get out there to try?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the power of the what if.
Yeah. It's the power of what if. Like, if you just sort of reframe it, it's like, well, wait a minute. If I just showed up on the trail every day, I would get fit enough to be able to do the challenge. Like, it's so simple and silly, but it reframes our thinking instead of, I would say, seeing limitations, seeing possibilities.
Yeah. So as we're having this conversation, you had this epiphany that reminded you that the times that you've been, I'm going to say, in your happy place or in flow or whatever, is it's always been in nature. It's always been when you're hiking. And so you were reminded of this, which means you had these experiences previously, maybe didn't totally connect on them. But I just wonder if you could talk about where your, like maybe some of those early nature experiences where you've kind of first recognized that, or like, where did this adventure spirit come from?
Yeah, well, great question. And actually, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. So permission to get maybe a little bit more personal and vulnerable than I normally will on a podcast. So I grew up on a 14-acre farm. I grew up in nature. My parents were hippies before it was like bougie and cool. And, I grew up running around barefoot. There was no technology. Like, I'm probably one of the last generations that remember those times. So being in nature has always been core to who I am. Then in adult life, I started hiking regularly. And then in the process of kind of having 2 kids and the global pandemic, I got sort of out of the habit. But when I look back in my life, first and foremost, I found myself, I was married once before my current marriage to Steve. And it was a difficult divorce, Scott. I had to go to nature to find myself again in that process. And I just started showing up in nature every day in a state park in Pennsylvania and like debating, how did I get here? What went wrong? How am I culpable in this whole arrangement? And I had this epiphany, a few weeks into the trail time, where I was like, wait a minute, this actually isn't my choice. It's not my journey. And I do have a decision that I could walk away and live a different life. So that was the first time. Accidentally, again, practicing this, left the cell phone in the car, went via nature and movement. The second time was at the height of the global pandemic and in this kind of very high pressure global sales role. I was like working 16, 18-hour days. And one day I just canceled my Zoom call and drove to the trailhead in Portland and left my cell phone in the car and went for a hike. And again, just committed to showing up every day for a period of time. And I came to the epiphany that I was letting my career define my self-worth and all of my family's decisions on where we lived and how we sort of behaved. And I think a few months into that, I sort of made the decision that my career didn't need to define me anymore. I could go do something else. So those were the first. So when I found myself on the mountaintop that morning, I was like, all right, it's worked before. What were the components that made it work? And that's where I like started to break down like, okay, so I was in nature, I was moving, and I didn't have my cell phone. How do I recreate that?
Yeah. Well, it seems though, like as I'm listening to you talk, it almost seems like nature is just, this is going to sound corny, but like second nature for you. Because it's just like you keep finding yourself in the woods or finding yourself on the trail. And I'm just wondering, like, and you said you grew up on a farm. Is it that simple? Like what was the pull to nature? Those first, you do remember, like as you became an adult and you found yourself just like going to the trail or going to the woods, like what was that calling that pulled you there?
You know what? I've never really thought too much about it or unpacked it. I think a few things, Scott. First and foremost, I think there's always been this calling back to my childhood and just feeling so at home in nature. I also, I think, always sort of go to nature to connect with my dad. I lost him when I was 4 years old to a tragic car accident. And my dad loved being outdoors. He was an avid hunter and fisherman, and he is the reason we had this 14-acre farm. It was his dream to build this sort of amazing farm where we would grow our own food and have animals. And so I think subconsciously it was always a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And I think too, just I've lived these periods of my life where being in nature has just been so transformative to me. So almost subconsciously, it's like, okay, so I have this challenge or this issue I'm wrestling with. I don't know how to solve it, but I know where to go. And so I never really thought too much about it. To your point, it's like this natural pull that just sort of, I find myself in these places and I'm like, oh, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Well, so that's a great segue to what I want to get into next, because so much of what you do inside of Hike to Become is helping people unlock business ideas in nature.
Yes.
And you just talked about it, that, nature is the environment, but how does it happen? And I guess sort of what do you do with clients to facilitate that process in nature?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I did that Hike 31 challenge myself, I worked through the uncomfortable thoughts and then becoming fearless. And then I started to like have these thoughts, Scott, of like, wait a minute, I'm not showing up authentically in my work. What if I did though? And I thought, if hiking's been so pivotal for me and a place where I always have my best ideas, what if I took my consulting clients hiking? And at the time I had just been hired as a keynote speaker for a company retreat, which just so happened to be at a state park outside of Seattle.
Nice.
So I called the CEO, his name is John, who hired me. And I said, hey, John, I got a crazy idea. What if I delivered like half the keynote content, then took the group on a guided hike, and then came back and did the rest of the keynote content? And to this day, I thank him so much because he was like, absolutely, yeah, sure, let's do it. Like there was no hesitancy on his behalf. And so that was January of 2024, and people loved it. And I've been hiking with my clients ever since. And I teach them my methodology. I use my background in business strategy, where, you can practice the Hike 31 challenge on your own, right? To unlock some ideas and sort of go through this process on your own. However, most of the clients that engage me are either dealing with a business challenge, trying to figure out strategic planning, or perhaps trying to like reinvent themselves in their career. And what I've done is I've created a Hike to Become method that's kind of unique to me and my expertise, where I blend kind of all the metrics of what science says when you reach different thresholds with a list or of specific questions that I ask people on the trail. So any engagement with me typically starts with a hike, and we are unplugged. And I ask a specific list of questions at different metric points where we get different answers than traditional coaching or consulting. And so once we do all of that, then we go to my office or wherever we're at, and we create a strategic plan around those answers that finally feel aligned with who that individual is versus just looking at numbers and data.
That is so cool. All right. So I'm getting a visual in my head. Like, I'm curious, like, do you know the trail that you're taking them on? Is it consistent? Because I'm imagining like I'm on the hardest part of the trail. I'm huffing and puffing, and here comes the zinger question.
Yeah.
Is it strategic?
It's strategic-ish, if you're ready for this. And Most clients I take to a different trail. I kind of like, and depending on the client's physical capabilities, what we're wrestling with, how long we need to be out there, how much time we have allotted, I pick a lot of different variety of trails. I've taken groups hiking in 5 states in the past year. So yes, first and foremost, I always scout the trail ahead of time, a day before. I make sure I know trail conditions. I make sure I know how long we're going for. And I just sort of know in the back of my head, because I've studied the science so much and interviewed experts, when we hit different thresholds to reduce stress and anxiety, when we hit different thresholds to enhance emotional well-being. And then the real zingers, to your point, come after the cognitive function has changed, because I get different answers than it would happen in an office space. I also ask a lot of questions that don't normally get asked in traditional coaching or consulting. And the reason I do that is because I really need to understand the human being behind the business. If we're going to design a strategic plan, support like what they ultimately want to do.
Sweet. Do you can you think of any examples of like any breakthroughs or ideas that manifested on the trail?
Well, so many. So I've had one individual who's had a very, very successful career doing one thing. And when I got her out on the trail, so this is the part that is really interesting to me. Yeah, I'm a business strategist, but I really like to think of myself as a guide in this process. Scott, to this day, I do not know the outcomes of what will happen on the trail. And with this specific individual, we hiked for a little bit and we got to talking about what she was currently doing and how successful it had been throughout her life. And then we did a grounding session in a dry creek bed. We took our shoes off. We just sort of sat with our feet in the ground. And as I got to talking to her more, at one point she just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm so done. I'm done. In fact, here's what I want to do instead. So she sort of but had this idea that she wanted to go in sort of a completely different direction with a certain venture, that we just gave it permission to breathe on the trail, where I think had we been in the office, we would have been like, that's a little too out there. Maybe not for you. But sitting there with our toes in the dirt and just talking it through, that was where her passion lied and where she really wanted to see that develop.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of that on the trail where people are surprising themselves with the direction it goes.
Yeah.
And the biggest part of my process, where I think I'm not the person for everybody, because things happen on the trail that people don't anticipate. And it's my job as, I think, a guide to let those ideas breathe versus telling people it's not possible.
I love how you call it letting the ideas breathe. I totally feel that. Just being out in nature and just being able to put it out there and just allow it to have some space. And I just think that's so cool.
Thank you.
So Jessica, your role at Hike to Become is Chief Hiking Officer. Yeah. And you got to, it's Hike to Become is your baby. So you got to name yourself. Tell us about your title.
Yeah. So it first sort of started as a joke, if I'm being honest. I would go speak at these events or these conferences, and I would meet people afterwards, and they would kind of come up to me and they'd be like, I know you. You're the hiking girl. And like at first, Scott, I would be like, oh, that's so sweet. Like they enjoyed my speech, or like they've heard of me or whatever. And then I'd be like, well, wait a minute. I'm not a hiking girl. Like I have my MBA in international business. I've worked with some of the largest companies on the planet. Like I actually really know a lot about business strategy. So it kind of became a little bit tongue in cheek of like, okay, so how do I reclaim what I actually do versus sort of people being like, you're so to doors, like you're a hiking girl. And so I named myself Chief Hiking Officer, a bit tongue in cheek, but it actually sort of worked out because a couple of things. One of the main jobs of a CEO is the strategic vision of the company. Mm-hmm. A lot of who I hike with and a lot of my clients are, director, VP level up to C-suite. So the way I look at it is, my job is to help unlock strategic vision for these people. I've just found a better place to do it than a boardroom. And so it sort of became at first a joke and the title I would use, and then people really started to love it and lean in and want to know more. And so now that's just sort of how I'm known. And I love it.
It's fun too. I mean, it brings, I mean, I think fun is important in the that you do. So speaking of the work that you do, like, can we talk a little bit about like nuts and bolts? Like, how do you work with your clients? What work do you do? Like, and if, how do people work with you? Yeah.
For sure. So most people engage me, or where I feel like I'm best suited to would be like facilitating board meeting that are around strategic planning. I facilitated a board meeting last September where we hiked unplugged in Discovery Park outside of Seattle for 2 hours. And this board reimagined their vision statement to be wildly different than what it was. And so board meeting, executive retreats, I typically work with, I would say, groups of executives of like 10 to 20. And we do a campfire chat. I share my hike to become story. And then there's always a guided hike component where one of two things happen, Scott. There's kind of two unique experiences I'm curating right now for companies and teams. One is called the Hike to Become experience. And that's really all around finding powerful presence in your life and your work again. A lot of times that looks like a campfire chat. I share the Hike to Become story. I share how people should embrace sort of stepping away and unplugging to gain alignment in their life and their work again. And then I take them on a guided hike that involves forest bathing, maybe some grounding. I've had people cold plunge in waterfalls. It is a very unique, highly curated, fun experience. So that's the Hike to Become experience. And I walk them through the whole methodology where they really turn their brains on for whatever big work they need to do next. The second experience is what I'm calling the Wild Advantage experience, which is sort of teasing out the book. But that's where I actually stay with the group beyond the Hike to Become experience. And we have a specific business challenge or strategic planning session we're engaged in. And that's much more highly curated in that we sort of start teasing out the challenge or coming up with the innovation in the woods together. And then there's a strategy session that I facilitate afterwards. So those are kind of the two things that I do. I fly around the country to facilitate these meetings. Whether it's company offsites, board meetings, or executive retreats. That's kind of my jam and where I have the most fun. And I think my clients really enjoy it as well.
So question for you about like when you're doing this with groups, do you get people that are like, oh, I don't like bugs. Oh, I don't want to be outside. Like,
yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So there's always, what's interesting is there's always at least, I'd say 1 to 3 on average skeptics in the group. And I've kind of like now been able to figure it out. So first things first, Scott, I always am meticulous about I have several planning sessions with whatever leader engages me. And we make sure we understand who the individuals are that might have a hesitancy or don't like bugs or hate hiking or whatever. And we just kind of work to alleviate any fears. A lot of the hiking I do with groups, Scott, is not major elevation changes. It's not a strenuous hike. It's kind of like a walk in the woods, but it's about the time we spend in the woods and reaching the metrics. So I've had to make some unique concessions for certain individuals, but it always works. And what I found is the biggest skeptics of my work, or the people who are like, oh, I hate hiking, or like, I don't like bugs, actually tend to be the people that have the most transformative experiences. Yeah. Because unlike you and I, they don't spend a lot of time in nature. Right. And so when they get to experience it, they're like, well, they actually become the earliest adopters and the people who typically finish the Hike 31 challenge afterwards.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Jessica, you are working on a book.
I am. Yeah.
It's really exciting.
Thank you.
What can you share with us?
Sure. So, wow. And you know yourself, a published author, writing a book it's a journey. Would you agree, Scott?
For sure. Absolutely.
You kind of start out with one idea in your head, and then I feel like at some point the book takes over and you're now just like the guide to usher it into the world. That the book is about, I would say 85% written. I need to sort of finish up the rest in the next few weeks. The book it's called The Wild Advantage. The working subtitle is, Get Outside, Unplug, and Unlock Your Boldest Business Ideas.
Nice.
And the journey I've been on is, at first it was just sort of about me and my own personal story. But the past 18 months, I sort of stopped writing 9 months ago and felt complete lack of inspiration because I started having all these breakthroughs with my clients on the trail. And I was like, God, this isn't about me anymore. This is about them. So it's taken a long time because I'm now conducting interviews with the clients who've spent time on the trail. also experts in their field as to why the science works. So I'm trying to bring a book into the world, hopefully that will change our relationship with the way we work, redefine our relationship with nature, and ultimately change our relationship with ourselves. And I just want to do it justice and make sure it's so much more than my story now. It's the story of everyone who spent trail time with me.
Yeah, I'm so excited about it. I mean, here in this podcast, we're just encouraging people to listen to that voice inside that calls them to adventure and to get outside. And you're putting some science behind it, which is, I'm really, really pumped about that. I can't wait to read it. Is there a timeline?
I'm really hoping by August, September, the book will be published. But as I say that out loud, and again, Scott, you can empathize as a published author. As I say it out loud, I feel like I better get to work.
It's gonna come when it's meant to be in the world, but I can't wait for it. I'm ready. I'm so ready for it now. Jessica, how can people find out more about you, get in touch, work with you, watch your TED Talk?
Sure. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's the social media that I'm the most active on. People can check out the website, which is hiketobecome.com. And I would just encourage anyone who has questions or curious about working together to reach out direct. And yeah, I'm having a blast. And, as I wrote sort of the conclusion of the book the other day, Scott, I was writing a lot of stories of my clients and their big breakthroughs on the trails. And one of the parting lines is, and I'm just getting started. So, yeah, I'm so stoked for the journey and what may unfold in the next few years here.
Yeah. And you say you're just getting started, but you've already done so much. You've created this amazing brand, like you're changing lives out on the trail. I mean, you've got an epic story. And at some point, Hollywood's going to pick up on this. And Jessica, they're going to want to make a movie about you. And when they do, I want to know who's going to be the Hollywood actress that's going to play you in your movie.
Okay, so full transparency. I am not hip and cool enough to even know who the most popular Hollywood actresses even are. Like, I watch zero TV and I just read more. And if I watch any TV, it's a Disney movie. So, who I think would play me in a Hollywood movie? My daughter.
Oh, I love it. Your daughter is going to play you in your movie. This is going to be amazing.
Yep. So my husband is a former theater major, and we love to encourage our kids to dance and sing a lot in the house.
Perfect.
And she is already a little thespian, so it would be probably my daughter, Bren.
This is going to be so good. What's your movie going to be called?
The Accidental Hiker.
Ooh. Nice. I like it. Yeah. 31 days of accidentally teaching yourself lessons that work.
Yeah.
For unlocking your best business ideas. Jessica, this has been so much fun. I really, really appreciate you sharing your story and the work that you're doing. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Jessica's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Jessica, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Scott.